Let's talk about Romelo height, because this is one of those preseason performances where the box score doesn't tell the entire story, but it also doesn't exactly make you feel warm and fuzzy if you're a Niners fan. Height finished the game with just one assisted tackle. That's it. No sack, no tackle for loss, no quarterback hit, and more importantly, no consistent evidence that he was affecting the game as a pass rusher. And when you go back and watch some of his reps, you can understand why. There's already some concern starting to creep into the conversation. There was one particular rush that really stood out. Height came around the edge with an outside move, tried to spin back inside, and ended up spinning directly into the left guard, who completely shut the play down. That's the kind of rep you can forgive from a young developmental prospect. Rookies are going to get their lunch money taken occasionally in the trenches. That's football. But here's the problem for Height. The normal rookie excuse doesn't completely apply to him. Romelo Height isn't 21 years old and coming into the NFL as a raw prospect who needs several seasons to figure everything out. He's 25 years old. That was part of the reason San Francisco was interested in him in the first place. The 49ers needed an edge rusher who could contribute sooner rather than later. And that changes the evaluation. When you draft a 25-year-old defensive end, you're not necessarily expecting him to walk into the building and become Nick Bosa overnight. Nobody is asking for that. But you are expecting some signs that the player can help you right now. That's what makes this performance worth discussing. This isn't me saying the 49ers should give up on Romelo Height. Absolutely not. It would be ridiculous to make that conclusion after one preseason game. But it would be equally ridiculous to pretend there isn't a legitimate concern here. San Francisco drafted Height because the edge rushing situation needed help. They didn't need another player whose best football might arrive 3 years from now. They needed someone who could eventually step into meaningful snaps and create pressure on opposing quarterbacks. And so far, we haven't seen enough. That's especially important because Height's college production requires a little bit of context. He did produce, but much of that production came relatively late in his college career. And he was playing opposite one of the best edge rushers in college football. That matters because defensive lines are often about relationships. If one edge rusher is constantly demanding double teams, forcing offensive tackles to slide protection, and creating chaos on one side of the formation, the guy lined up across from him can get opportunities that wouldn't necessarily exist in a different environment. Now Height has to create those opportunities himself. And that's where the evaluation gets interesting. The talent is there. Height has legitimate speed, and his dip move can be effective because he can get his shoulders underneath an offensive lineman's hands. He also has a spin counter in his toolbox. Those are real pass rush tools. But tools aren't production. At the NFL level, offensive tackles are bigger, stronger, faster, and far less forgiving. If your entire pass rush plan is based on winning with speed, eventually somebody is going to sit on that speed and force you to have another answer. That's where Height needs to show growth. Because if the speed doesn't win, can he convert speed to power? Can he threaten the inside shoulder? Can he force an offensive tackle to change his set? Can he turn a clean first step into actual pressure instead of simply getting close to the quarterback? Those are the questions the 49ers need answered. And here's where this becomes particularly interesting for San Francisco 49ers news. Height wasn't even the rookie defensive player who made the strongest impression in this game. Jaden Duga, despite recording only 2 tackles, reportedly looked far more active and noticeable throughout the game. Titus Leo made a play. Ogbonia Okoronkwo made a play. Meanwhile, Height was difficult to find. That doesn't mean Leo or Okoronkwo suddenly have better long-term projections than Height. It means the competition for snaps is real. And that competition could become a very important storyline over the next couple of preseason games. If you're watching Niners news today and wondering whether this is the moment to panic about Height, I'd say no. But this is absolutely the moment to start paying attention, because there's a big difference between writing off a player and putting that player under the microscope. Height is under the microscope now. And honestly, that's where he should be. So let me ask you directly, Niners fan, after seeing this performance, are you actually concerned about Romelo Height? Or do you think we're putting way too much weight on one preseason game? Give me a simple yes or no in the comments, and if you're confident in him, give me your confidence level from 1 to 10. Because the next question is even more important. What happens when Nick Bosa comes back? That could completely change the environment around height, but it may not solve the underlying problem. Romelo Height's biggest challenge isn't simply getting on the field, it's proving that he has more than one way to win once he's there. And that's where this evaluation gets much more interesting for the 49ers, because right now, the question isn't whether Height has athletic ability. He clearly does. The question is whether that athletic ability can consistently turn into NFL production. Height's best weapon is his first step and his ability to attack the edge with speed. When that works, it can make an offensive tackle look like he's trying to block somebody who already knows the playbook. But NFL tackles adjust quickly. The moment they realize a pass rusher wants to win, exclusively with speed, they start changing their sets, widening their base, getting more depth, and waiting for that outside rush. Suddenly, the speed rusher has to have an answer. And that's where power becomes so important. The concern coming out of this game is that Height hasn't shown enough ability to win through an offensive lineman when the speed rush gets stalled. He has the dip move, and that's a legitimate weapon. He can reduce his surface area, get underneath the tackle's hands, and try to bend around the corner. The spin counter gives him another avenue as well. But those moves only matter if the offensive lineman has to respect everything else you're doing. Think about it this way. If a quarterback only has one route concept he trusts, eventually the defense is going to sit on it. Same thing in the trenches. If the offensive tackle knows the defender is coming off the ball looking to win with speed, that tackle can prepare for it. Height needs to make that preparation painful. That means developing a counter to the counter. He needs to be able to convert speed into power. He needs to threaten the inside. He needs to make tackles hesitate. Maybe one snap he's screaming around the edge, and the next snap he chops inside or drives through the tackle's chest. That's how you start creating uncertainty. That's how a pass rusher turns an athletic trait into a complete skill set. And this is why the comparison to somebody like Bryce Huff comes up. Huff was never necessarily known as a dominant run defender, but when he got opportunities as a pass rusher, there was a genuine sense that he could ruin a quarterback's afternoon. He had a clear specialty and could weaponize it. Height hasn't established that at the NFL level yet. That's a crucial distinction. You can live with a defensive end who isn't perfect against the run if he is consistently terrifying as a pass rusher. But if you're not giving the defense much against the run, and you're also not consistently winning as a pass rusher, then suddenly your role becomes much harder to justify. And that's exactly why the other edge defenders deserve attention. Ogbonya Okoronkwo making a noticeable play matters more than the box score alone suggests. Not because one play suddenly makes him a star, but because these preseason reps are evaluations. Coaches are looking for somebody to separate from the pack. They're asking who can win their assignment, who can affect the quarterback, who can hold up against the run, and who can be trusted when the games actually count. If Okoronkwo keeps making plays while Height remains quiet, that's going to create a very interesting roster conversation. And there's another layer here that can't be ignored. Nick Bosa. When Bosa returns, the entire equation could change. Opposing offenses aren't going to treat the 49ers defensive line the same way when Bosa is on the field. His presence demands attention. Protection changes. Tackles become more conservative. Running backs may stay in to help. Quarterbacks get the ball out faster. That could absolutely create opportunities for Height. But here's where I disagree with the idea that Bosa coming back automatically fixes Height. It doesn't. Bosa can create opportunities. He can't finish the rush for another player. If Height is lined up opposite Bosa and consistently seeing one-on-one protection, that's an opportunity he has to capitalize on. There shouldn't be an expectation that Bosa returns and suddenly turns every young edge rusher into a 10-sack player. That's not how this works. In fact, Bosa's return could make the evaluation even clearer. Because if Height is getting favorable situations and still isn't generating pressure, then the argument becomes stronger that the 49ers need another option. And that brings us back to the most important thing about this preseason performance. It isn't the one assisted tackle that should bother you most. It's the absence of disruption. A defensive lineman can have one tackle and still dominate a game. He can collapse the pocket, force a quarterback to step up, occupy multiple blockers, or create opportunities for teammates. The box score doesn't always catch that. But when you watch the film and don't see those things consistently either, that's when the alarm starts making a little more noise. That's where Height is right now. Not in disaster territory. Not at the move on from him stage. but firmly in the show us something category. And the next two preseason games are going to matter because the 49ers need evidence. They need to see whether that quiet first outing was simply one bad night or whether it reflects a larger limitation in his game. As a Niners fan, that's the part I'd watch most closely. Don't obsess over whether Height gets a sack. Watch how he wins. Watch the first two steps. Watch how the tackle reacts. Watch whether Height can counter when the outside rush gets shut down. Watch whether he can hold the edge against the run. Watch whether he starts affecting the quarterback even when he doesn't officially record a statistic. Those details will tell you much more than a fantasy football style box score. And here's the question I want you thinking about before we get to the final part of this conversation. If Height doesn't start separating himself over the next couple of weeks, how much longer can San Francisco afford to wait? Because the answer could have a major impact on the 49ers defensive line rotation, and it could force the front office to make a move sooner than anybody expected. The good news for Romelo Height is that this story is nowhere near finished. The bad news is that the 49ers don't have the luxury of pretending the clock isn't ticking. He's 25 years old. He was brought in with the expectation that he could contribute relatively quickly, and San Francisco has a defense that's built to win right now. That means these next preseason opportunities aren't simply about getting reps. They're about showing the coaching staff that he can be trusted with meaningful snaps when the games count. So what exactly should you be watching for? Forget the idea that Height has to suddenly explode for 3 sacks in a preseason game. That's not realistic, and it's not even the best way to evaluate him. What San Francisco needs to see is consistent disruption. Can he threaten the edge? Can he force the tackle to open his hips? Can he convert that speed into power once the tackle oversets? Can he collapse the pocket even when he doesn't finish the play with a sack? That's the real measuring stick. A sack is the final line on the stat sheet. The process that creates the sack is what defensive coaches care about. If Height is constantly getting the quarterback to move, forcing hurried throws, or putting the tackle in uncomfortable positions, that's progress. But if he's repeatedly getting stonewalled at the line of scrimmage, then the concerns become much more serious. And there's another thing San Francisco has to determine. Can Height stay on the field in more situations? Because if a player only gives you value as a situational pass rusher, that's useful. There's nothing wrong with having a specialist. But then the roster has to be built around that reality. You need players who can handle early downs. You need players who can defend the run. You need players who can survive when the offense knows you're bringing pressure. That could be where someone like Ogbonnia Okoronkwo becomes more important. If Okoronkwo continues making plays while also giving the 49ers a more dependable all-around presence, he could force his way into a larger role. And suddenly, this isn't just about whether Height is good enough, it's about whether Height is better than the alternatives. That's the standard. The NFL doesn't hand out snaps because a player has an interesting backstory or because a team invested a draft pick in him. Eventually, you have to earn those snaps. That's especially true on a roster with legitimate aspirations. And this is where the possibility of the 49ers adding another edge rusher becomes worth discussing. I'm not saying San Francisco needs to panic and trade half the roster because Romelo Height had one quiet preseason game. That's exactly the kind of overreaction that gets people in trouble. But if the next 2 games tell the same story, the front office should at least explore whether another veteran pass rusher is available. Remember, the goal isn't to punish Height. The goal is to make the defensive line better. If Height develops into the player the 49ers believed they were drafting, fantastic. That's the best case scenario. You suddenly have a younger athletic edge rusher who can contribute behind or alongside Nick Bosa and give San Francisco another legitimate weapon. But if he doesn't develop quickly enough, the worst thing the 49ers could do would be to keep forcing the issue because they don't want to admit the projection was too optimistic. Good teams adjust. Great teams adjust before the problem becomes expensive. That's why Nick Bosa's situation matters too. If Bosa is potentially heading toward an extension conversation, the pressure on the rest of the defensive line becomes even more interesting. You want to know what you have around him. You want to know which players can consistently win one-on-one when Bosa is attracting attention. You want to know whether Height is part of that future or simply a rotational piece. And that's something we're going to learn very quickly. For me, the fair assessment right now is this. Romelo Height is not a bust. He's not a player you should be ready to write off. But he also hasn't done enough to make you feel comfortable about his role yet. That's the uncomfortable middle ground. The tools are there. The athleticism is there. The dip move is there. The spin counter is there. But the production and consistency haven't caught up with the opportunity. And when you're talking about a 25-year-old rookie edge rusher, that matters. So over the next couple of preseason games, keep your eyes on the little things. Watch whether Height starts getting more consistent pressure. Watch how he handles stronger offensive tackles. Watch whether he develops something beyond the pure speed rush. And most importantly, watch whether the 49ers start trusting him with more meaningful situations. Because that will tell us what the coaching staff actually thinks. And Niners fan, I want your prediction right now. Do you believe Romelo Height eventually becomes a reliable starter or major rotational pass rusher for San Francisco? Or are you starting to think the 49ers may need to find another answer at defensive end? And don't just tell me what you hope happens. Tell me what you actually believe after watching him. Because that's the fascinating part of this story. One preseason game can be noise. 2 or 3 games can start becoming a pattern. And if the pattern changes, we'll give Height credit. If it doesn't, then San Francisco has a decision to make. That's the bigger lesson here. The 49ers don't need every young player to become a star. They just need to identify who can actually help them win football games. If Romelo Height proves he can do that, this conversation disappears pretty quickly. If he can't, the pressure on the front office to find another edge rusher gets much louder. For now, the verdict is simple. Don't panic, don't write him off, but don't ignore the warning signs either. That's where this Niners news story stands today. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, share this video with another Niners fan, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next San Francisco 49ers news update. We're pushing toward 2,000 subscribers, and every new subscriber helps this channel keep bringing you straight up Niners news today, without the fluff. Now, I want to leave you with one final question. If Romelo Height doesn't break out over these next preseason games, should the 49ers trust him to develop during the regular season, or should they go find a proven veteran before the opportunity closes? That answer could become one of the most important roster decisions of the entire preseason.